The reflection didn't match the history I knew. The glass should have shown a boy in a stolen dress, awkward and angular, a caricature of something he wasn't allowed to touch. Instead, the image staring back was terrifyingly cohesive. The silk of the wrap dress felt cool against my chest, slipping over skin that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Or perhaps, finally, to me. It felt foreign and impossibly natural all at once. Then, the sound cut through the quiet hum of the afternoon, the heavy metallic clack of the front door unlocking downstairs. The air in the room froze. 3 hours earlier, the house had been a different creature entirely. When the garage door rumbled shut behind my parents' car, leaving me alone in the silence, the space didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. You know that feeling when a room is waiting for you to do something? That was the air in the hallway. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the refrigerator hum and the settling of the floorboards, feeling the familiar weight of my own body. It wasn't a sharp pain, exactly. It wasn't a scream. It was just a low-frequency static that lived under my skin. A constant, quiet reminder that the shape I occupied didn't quite fit the person living inside it. I wandered through the living room, conscious of how heavy my walk sounded on the hardwood. For 19 years, I had cultivated a specific kind of invisibility. I was Casey, solid, reliable, gray. I moved in straight lines. I kept my elbows in. I occupied space with an apology. But then there was Riley. My sister was the chaotic, colorful counterpoint to my contained existence. If I was a black and white sketch, Riley was an oil painting left out in the rain, messy, vibrant, and impossible to ignore. She left trails of herself everywhere she went. Bobby pins on the bathroom sink, half-read paperbacks on the sofa, scarves draped over banisters like flags claiming territory. I loved her for it, and I envied her with a jealousy so quiet it felt like shame. I envied the ease with which she moved through the world, the way her clothes seemed to be an extension of her voice rather than a uniform she was forced to wear. I hadn't planned this. I was supposed to be studying, buried in textbooks that felt as dry as the persona I maintained. But I walked past the landing and saw it, a pile of laundry she'd discarded on the wicker chair outside her room. It was just a heap of clothes, a domestic accident. But in the slant of the afternoon sun, it looked like a wreckage of possibilities. A flash of floral print, the sheen of a slip, the deep crimson of a scarf. It stopped me cold. It wasn't just fabric. It was evidence of a world I was exiled from. The colors seemed to vibrate against the beige neutrality of the hallway. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The house was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My hand hovered over the cold brass of her doorknob. This wasn't just about privacy. We respected each other's space. It was the unspoken treaty of siblings. Entering her room without asking felt like a violation, a theft. But the pull wasn't logical. It was magnetic. It was the same gravity that pulls the tide toward the moon. I told myself I was just going to look, just going to touch the fabrics, feel the difference between the rough denim I wore and the softness she lived in. I needed to know if the texture matched the hunger in my chest. I turned the knob. It turned silently, a conspiracy of mechanics. The air inside hit me first. It didn't smell like the rest of the house. It smelled like lavender laundry detergent, stale hairspray, and something else. Something distinctly her. It was the scent of permission. I stepped onto the carpet and the atmosphere changed. The hallway was the world I knew. This room was the world I needed. The blinds were half drawn. slicing the light into dusty golden beams that illuminated the chaos of her vanity. I felt like an intruder, a ghost haunting a life I could never have. But as the door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in, the guilt was braided with a thrill so sharp it made my hands shake. I wasn't just in a room. I was in the sanctuary. Riley's room was a landscape of accumulation. Where my shelves were sparse, holding only the things I could justify keeping, hers were groaning under the weight of sheer existence. It was a sensory overload that made my breath hitch. There were necklaces tangled like golden vines on the vanity, catching the afternoon light in a way that felt almost aggressive. Scarves pooled on the floor like spilled paint. It was the visual noise of a life lived out loud, a life that didn't apologize for taking up space. I stood in the center of it, feeling small and gray, a smudge of charcoal on a vibrant canvas. The air here was thicker, saturated with the perfumes she layered and the lingering warmth of the hairdryer. It felt like walking into a museum of someone else's joy, a place where every object had a story I wasn't written into. I moved toward the closet. The sliding doors were slightly ajar, revealing a crammed row of hangers that looked less like storage and more like a history of her moods. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and touched the sleeve of a denim jacket, then a velvet blouse, then the cool, slippery slide of rayon. It was strange. I had touched clothes before. I did my own laundry. I folded towels. But this was different. There is a profound gap between holding fabric because you need to move it and holding fabric because you need it to hold you. I wasn't testing the material for quality. I was testing it for resonance. I was looking for a frequency that matched the hum under my skin, searching for a texture that wouldn't feel like a lie against my chest. I bypassed the loud pieces. There was a sequined tank top that she wore to parties, a thing of flash and performance. I didn't want performance. I wasn't looking for a costume to wear on a stage. I was looking for the clothes I would wear in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, if the world were different. I pushed past the trends and the noise until my fingers caught on something substantial. It was a vintage wrap dress, silk, the color of deep, bruised plums. It felt heavy on the hanger, serious. It didn't demand attention, it commanded presence. It looked like something that required a woman, not a girl. It felt true in a way the glitter didn't. It had a weight to it that promised to ground me, to keep me from floating away into the dissociation I lived in. I pulled it out. The sound of the hanger sliding along the metal rod was a screech of accusation. Theft, my brain whispered. Pervert. Intruder. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the wave of shame that threatened to send me running back to the hallway. But the shame was thinner than the longing. I wasn't stealing this. I rationalized it with a desperate internal logic. I wasn't taking the dress away from her. I was borrowing the architecture she lived in to see if my soul could stand up inside it. It was an archaeological dig, and I was the artifact waiting to be found. I needed to know if the shape of me existed outside of my head. I laid the dress on the unmade bed. It looked like a shadow waiting to be cast. I turned back to the door and locked it. The click of the latch was final, a punctuation mark ending the sentence of my previous life. I went to the window and adjusted the blinds, tilting the slats until the harsh afternoon glare was filtered into something softer, a hazy, forgiving twilight. I needed the room to be gentle. I needed the mirror to be kind. Then came the hardest part. I unbuttoned my shirt. My fingers felt clumsy, thick, like they belonged to someone else. I pushed the denim down, stepping out of the jeans that had always felt like cardboard armor. Stiff, protective, and utterly unfeeling. As the pile of male clothing grew on the floor, I felt a sudden, terrifying formlessness. Without the uniform of Casey the brother, Casey the son, I was just static in the air. I was a question mark standing in the center of the room, shivering not from cold, but from the sheer, naked exposure of being between two worlds, waiting for the silk to tell me who I was. The package of stockings sat on the bedspread, a small, flat square of cardboard and plastic that felt heavier than it looked. Opening it required a delicacy my hands weren't used to. I felt like I was dismantling a bomb or handling a rare manuscript. The crinkle of the cellophane sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I held the nylon up to the filtered light. It was a sheer, dark mesh, insubstantial as smoke. Yet, when I gathered the material in my palms, it had a tensile strength that surprised me. It demanded patience. You can't force your way into hosiery. You have to negotiate with it. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress springs shifting with a groan that seemed to protest my presence. The process of rolling the nylon up my leg was a revelation of texture. My skin, usually rough and ignored, suddenly became a landscape of sensation. The fabric didn't just sit on top of me, it compressed me. It held the muscles of my calves and thighs with a firm, constant pressure that felt like a second skin, one that was smoother, darker, and more refined than the one I was born with. When I stood up, the friction of my legs moving against each other was a new language. It wasn't the chafe of denim, it was a whisper, a soft, silken sound that made me hyper-aware of where my body began and ended. My legs felt longer, more architectural, as if the nylon had redrawn their very structure. Then came the dress. I lifted it from the bed, the plum silk slipping through my fingers like cool water. Stepping into it was an act of surrender. The fabric cascaded over my shoulders, settling with a weight that was entirely different from the cotton t-shirts I lived in. Cotton hangs, silk drapes. It follows the topography of the body, seeking out hollows and curves I didn't know I had. I pulled the wrap design across my chest and found the sash at the waist. This was the moment of reconstruction. As I pulled the tie tight, the geometry of my torso changed. The dress didn't care about the flat planes of my male chest or the squareness of my waist. It imposed its own logic. It cinched and flared, creating a waistline where there had been only a block. It felt like I was being braided into the fabric, the silk and my skin weaving together to form a new, composite creature. I moved to the vanity, sitting on the small, cushioned stool that felt too fragile for my weight. I avoided my eyes in the mirror, focusing instead on the array of bottles and compacts. The air here smelled of violets and dust. I picked up a compact of powder, the plastic cool and smooth. Applying it wasn't like painting a mask. It felt like archaeology. I was brushing away the surface layer of Casey the boy to excavate the face that had been buried underneath. The brush was soft, a ghost of a touch against my cheekbones. I watched my hand in the peripheral vision. It looked steadier than I felt. I found a tube of lipstick, a shade that looked like dried rose petals. The scent of it, waxy, floral, and nostalgic, hit me before the color did. I leaned in, the glass of the mirror fogging slightly with my breath. The application was slow, a terrifyingly precise operation. The cool glide of the pigment across my mouth felt illicit, a violation of every rule I had ever been taught. But as I pressed my lips together, the sensation was undeniably correct. It didn't feel like I was putting something on. It felt like I was taking a gag off. My mouth, usually set in a grim, straight line of male stoicism, softened. It looked fuller, more capable of words I hadn't learned yet. I stood up, and the change in my center of gravity was immediate. The heels I had slipped into, simple black pumps I'd found near the closet, tilted my pelvis forward, forcing my spine into a new alignment. I couldn't slouch. The clothes wouldn't permit it. The defensive hunch I carried like a shield dropped away, replaced by a vulnerability that felt dangerously open. My hips, usually locked tight to keep my walk rigid and linear, found a sudden, fluid swing. I took a step, and the movement rippled through the silk. I wasn't walking through the room anymore. I was gliding through it. The space around me seemed to bend to accommodate this new shape. I paused, letting my feet sink into the pile of the rug. Through the thin soles of the shoes and the sheer nylon, the texture of the carpet felt sharper, more immediate. It was grounding. It told me I was physically here, that this wasn't a hallucination induced by longing. I was standing in my sister's room, breathing her air, wearing her skin. And for the first time in 19 years, the static in my head had gone silent. The world was quiet. The only sound was the soft rustle of the dress as I turned, slowly, away from the safety of the bed and the dim corner. I pivoted on the ball of my foot, the movement smooth and inevitable, to face the judgment of the full-length mirror on the closet door. I didn't recognize her at first. That sounds like a cliché, like something you'd read in a bad novel, but I mean it physically. The brain expects patterns. My brain expected the sharp, rectangular outline of Casey. It expected the slump, the apology of the shoulders, the disconnect. But the mirror showed me someone else entirely. She was tall, yes, but the height wasn't looming anymore. It was statuesque. The plum silk held the waist in a way that made the hips look intentional, not just like bone structure I was trying to hide. The neck, usually hidden under collars, looked long and elegant, rising from the V of the wrap dress. It wasn't a boy in a dress. That was the fear that had kept my hand on the doorknob for 10 minutes. I had been terrified of looking ridiculous, of seeing a joke. But there was no joke here. The person in the glass was cohesive. That's the only word for it. The lipstick didn't look painted on, it looked like it belonged to the mouth. The dress didn't look draped over a mannequin. It looked like it was growing from the skin. I stared, and the breath went out of me in a long, shaky exhale that fogged the air between us. I couldn't look away. It was a kind of hunger I had never understood before. I used to hate mirrors. I brushed my teeth looking at the drain. But this? I wanted to memorize the way the light caught the curve of the cheekbone I had just excavated. I wanted to map the new territory of this body. The silence in the room deepened. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, and the light filtering through the blinds shifted from white to a heavy, syrupy gold. It hit the mirror at an angle, washing the reflection in a cinematic glow that blurred the edges of the room behind me. The clutter of Riley's life, the scarves, the jewelry, the posters, faded into a soft focus background, leaving only the woman in the center of the frame, sharp and luminous. A strange thought settled in my chest, heavy and absolute. He was the costume. The boy I had been dragging around for 19 years, the one with the heavy walk and the low voice and the stiff denim. That was the performance. That was the drag. This, the silk, the nylon, the color, this was just the skin underneath. I felt a sudden, vertigo-inducing shift in my memory. Every time I had sat in a classroom, every time I had shaken hands with a relative, every time I had answered to that name, I had been lying. I hadn't known I was lying, but looking at her now, the truth was so violent it made my knees weak. I was looking at the protagonist of a story I hadn't realized I was writing. I stepped closer to the glass. I needed to verify the physics of it. I reached out and touched the cold surface, my finger meeting the finger of the reflection. Down near the hem of the dress, right by my knee, there was a loose thread, a tiny, fraying string of purple silk. I stared at it. It was such a mundane detail. It wasn't magical. It was a flaw in the fabric. And that flaw broke me. If this were a dream, it would be perfect. If this were a fantasy, the dress would be flawless. But the thread was real. It meant the dress was real, which meant the body inside it was real, which meant she was real. The panic I usually lived with, the hum of anxiety, the need to check my posture, the surveillance of my own mannerisms, just vanished. It was like a fan had been turned off in a noisy room. My stomach, usually a knot of tension, settled into a strange, warm, liquid calm. I felt light. I felt possible. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to leave the room. I wasn't waiting to be over. I just wanted to stand there, in the golden dust motes, and breathe in the lavender air, and exist. I was finally, quietly, unmistakably here. Then the world broke. It came from outside, a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through the floorboards. A car door slamming. Not a neighbor's car. It was close. It was in the driveway. The sound was followed immediately by the cheerful, terrifying jingle of keys and the heavy clunk of the front door downstairs unlocking. The silence of the house shattered. The golden light suddenly felt cold. The reflection in the mirror didn't change, but the context did. In one heartbeat, she went from being a revelation to being evidence. The panic wasn't a noise. It was a temperature. It hit me like a bucket of ice water, immediate and shocking, instantly freezing the warm, golden euphoria that had filled the room just seconds before. The plum silk, which moments ago had felt like a second skin, a necessary, breathing part of my body, suddenly constricted. It felt heavy. It felt incriminating. It wasn't armor anymore. It was evidence. A stolen artifact wrapped around a thief. I looked at the reflection in the mirror, and the cohesive image I had fallen in love with fractured. The lipstick wasn't a liberation. It was a neon sign pointing to my guilt. The heels weren't architectural. They were precarious, stilts that I was bound to fall off of. I scrambled mentally, my eyes darting to the pile of denim on the floor. My old self lay there, discarded like a husk. The logic of escape was a terrifying equation that I couldn't solve. To get back to safety, I would have to undo the sash, step out of the silk without ripping it, peel off the nylons that clung so tight to my calves, scrub the pigment from my lips without leaving a red smear, find my shirt, button it, and compose a face of total neutrality. The math didn't work. Time was a physical object, and I didn't have enough of it. Downstairs, the house was alive with the sounds of invasion. I heard the distinct heavy thud of a gym bag hitting the hallway table, the jingle of keys being tossed into the ceramic bowl near the door, a sound that usually meant safety, family, home. Now it sounded like the locking mechanism of a cell. Riley was humming. It was something mindless, a pop song she played in the car, off-key and happy. That happiness was the worst part. It underscored just how much I was about to ruin. I was about to take her normal, breezy Tuesday afternoon and shatter it with my complication. I reached for the sash of the dress, my fingers trembling so hard they wouldn't cooperate. I pulled, but the silk knot held fast. It was tight, secure, mocking my clumsiness. And then my hands just stopped. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when you realize there is no exit. It's not bravery. It's not courage. It's just physics. I couldn't hide. The closet was too shallow to contain me. The bed was too low. The bathroom was across the hall, miles away across open territory. I was trapped in the sanctuary I had invaded. I let my hands drop to my sides. I didn't turn off the light. I didn't try to wipe my mouth with the back of my hand. I just stood there, a statue of my own secret, the heels digging into the carpet, waiting for the museum to open. The footsteps on the stairs were light, quick. Riley moved like she thought, fast and without hesitation. I watched the door handle. It was brass, slightly tarnished. I watched it turn. It moved slowly, almost politely. A mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to do. The door stuck a little at the bottom, it always did, and she pushed it open with her hip, carrying a basket of folded towels she must have brought up from the dryer. "Hey, did you see where I put my—" The sentence died in the air. The humming stopped abruptly, cut off as if someone had severed the vocal cord. The door swung fully open, creating a draft that touched my bare arms, raising gooseflesh. Riley stood in the frame. She was wearing jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. The effortless, unthinking version of the girl I was trying so desperately to construct in the mirror. She froze. The basket of towels didn't drop. That happens in movies, not in bedrooms. But her grip on the wicker rim tightened until her knuckles turned white. The silence that followed was heavy. It had mass. It filled the space between us, pushing the air out of the room until my lungs burned. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look at her face, so I looked at her shoes. Sneakers. Worn out. Real. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a burning flush that I knew was clashing horribly with the cool elegance of the plum dress. I was skinned. I was flayed open. There was no Casey the brother to hide behind anymore. There was no irony to shield me. There was only this. The silk, the lipstick, the nylon, and the terrifying truth standing in the afternoon light. Riley didn't scream. She didn't laugh. She didn't turn around and run. She just stepped fully into the room, her eyes wide and unreadable in the dim light, and let the door click shut behind her, sealing us both inside the wreckage of my secret. Riley didn't drop the basket. She set it down on the floor with a deliberate, slow movement, like she was placing a weight on a scale to see which way it would tip. She didn't look at the basket. Her eyes never left my face. I was braced for the explosion, the laugh, the scream, the accusation of perversion. I was ready for her to recoil. But the recoil didn't come. Instead, she tilted her head to the side, a gesture I had seen her use 1,000 times when she was trying to figure out a difficult piece of music or a complicated recipe. It was clinical. It was a curiosity so sharp, it felt like a scalpel. "You're wearing the vintage wrap," she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of any inflection. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, like noting the weather. My voice cracked, a jagged, ugly sound that didn't match the smooth elegance of the silk. "I can take it off. I'm sorry, Stop." She took a step closer. The floorboards creaked under her sneakers, a sound that felt incredibly loud in the suspended silence. She wasn't looking at the clothes anymore. She was looking at the way I was inhabiting them. She was looking at the lack of irony in my posture. If this were a joke, I would be mugging. I would be performing the caricature of a woman, exaggerating the hips, making a mockery of the gender. But I was standing there with the stillness of someone who had finally stopped running. I think that's what she saw. She saw the terrifying sincerity of it. "You're not making fun of me," she said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a diagnosis. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." She moved into my personal space. The scent of her, rain and fabric softener, mixed with the lavender in the air. I flinched, instinctively preparing for a shove or a grab, but her hands were gentle. She reached out, her fingers cool against my heated skin, and touched the shoulder of the dress. The strap had twisted during my panic, biting into the muscle of my neck. With a precise, practiced movement, she untwisted the silk, smoothing it flat against my collarbone. That small adjustment broke me. If she had hugged me, I might have fallen apart. If she had yelled, I would have shut down. But this was a collaboration. By fixing the dress, she was acknowledging that the dress belonged on me. She was validating the image. "It pulls a little at the shoulders," she murmured, her tone shifting from shock to a practical, almost conspiratorial assessment. "But the waist hit is perfect. I always thought this color was too dark for me, but it actually works with your skin tone. You're cooler toned than I am." The banality of the comment was a lifeline. We weren't discussing the massive, life-altering secret that had just been detonated in the room. We were discussing color theory. We were discussing fit. She was normalizing the extraordinary, pulling the terrifying reality of "my brother is wearing a dress" down to the manageable level of "does this fabric look good?" "Turn around," she commanded gently. I obeyed. The silk swished around my legs. I faced the mirror again, but this time, Riley was standing next to me. The reflection showed two women. One in jeans and a t-shirt, messy and real. The other in silk and heels, polished and trembling. But the echo between us was undeniable. We had the same eyes, wide, dark, and currently filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. We had the same mouth, though mine was painted the color of dried roses. Looking at us side by side, the brother I had been didn't just feel like a costume. He felt like a stranger we had both politely tolerated. Riley reached out and touched her own reflection, then traced the air near mine. "I never saw it," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "I always thought you looked like Dad. But you don't. You look like us." The air in the room seemed to thin, making it easier to breathe. The judgment hadn't come. The rejection hadn't come. Instead, there was this quiet, stunned recognition. She wasn't looking at a boy in a dress. She was meeting her sister for the first time. "You can't stay in here," she said suddenly, breaking the trance. My stomach dropped. "I'll take it off. I'll put it back." "No," Riley said, shaking her head, a small, dangerous smile touching the corners of her mouth. "That's not what I mean. I mean, you can't waste this. The light is perfect. The makeup is actually decent, surprisingly. If you take it off now, you're just hiding again. We need to see if it holds up." "See if what holds up?" "You," she said. "We're going out." Riley didn't give me time to overthink. She pulled a trench coat from the back of her closet, a long, camel-colored thing that looked like it belonged in a noir film, and held it open. It wasn't about hiding, she said. It was about layering. It was about controlling the reveal. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, the silk of the dress gliding against the lining of the coat with a friction that felt electric. It felt like a secret handshake, a transfer of power. Walking down the stairs felt like descending from a high wire without a net. Usually, the living room was just a room. The front door was just wood and glass. Now, they were checkpoints in a hostile territory. The house, which had always felt like a cage designed to keep Casey the son safe and contained, suddenly felt permeable. I wasn't sneaking out. I was being escorted. Riley walked ahead of me, her keys jingling, a sound that used to signal invasion, now signaling departure. She opened the front door. The evening air rushed in, smelling of wet asphalt and impending rain. It was cool against my legs, a sharp, shocking contrast to the warm, controlled climate of the bedroom. Stepping onto the porch was the most terrifying physical action I have ever taken. The concrete was hard under my heels. The world was vast. There were no blinds here to filter the light. There was just the gray, fading twilight and the street lamps buzzing to life. We didn't go far. We walked to our car, the gravel of the driveway crunching loudly under my feet, a sound that felt like it was announcing my presence to the entire neighborhood. I got into the passenger seat, maneuvering the coat and the dress and the legs that suddenly felt miles long. The car smelled like her. Coffee cups, mint gum, and old receipts. When she started the engine, the vibration hummed through the seat, resonating against the silk wrapped around my waist. We drove aimlessly. We looped through the quiet suburban streets, past houses where blue television light flickered in windows like distant signals. Riley turned on the radio. It was low, some synth pop track that felt cinematic. I watched the streetlights create a strobe effect inside the cabin, flashing rhythmic bars of amber light across my lap, illuminating the sheer darkness of the nylons for split seconds before plunging me back into shadow. It felt like a film reel of a life I was just starting to watch. At a stoplight, a car pulled up next to us. The driver, a shadow in the next lane, glanced over. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to duck. I wanted to dissolve into the upholstery. But Riley didn't look away, and the seatbelt held me in place. The driver looked, his eyes sliding over the silhouette of me, the trench coat, the suggestion of the dress, the lipstick in the amber light. And then he looked away. The light turned green. We moved forward. That was the moment the ceiling broke. I hadn't disintegrated. The sky hadn't fallen. I had been seen, really seen, even if just as a shape in the dark, and the world had continued to spin. The unmistakable woman in the mirror wasn't a trick of the light or a product of the silk. She was durable. She could exist in traffic. She could exist in the rain. The clothes were just the permission slip. The person inside them was the reality. We circled back to the house in silence. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a fragile, trembling hope. Walking back up the driveway, I didn't rush. I let the heels click on the pavement. I let the wind touch my face. I was returning to the cage, yes, but I knew now that the door wasn't locked. Taking the dress off that night felt like shedding a layer of skin. The silk slid away, but the ghost of the sensation remained. A phantom pressure on my waist, a memory of alignment in my spine. I hung the dress back in Riley's closet, placing it carefully between a flannel shirt and a blazer. It didn't look like stolen goods anymore. It looked like shared territory. If you've ever found a piece of yourself in an unexpected place, subscribe to follow the journey.